Hello and welcome to our interview series on technology impact assessment. My name is Katina Michael, and today I'm with Dr. George Argyrous. Welcome, George.
Thank you, Katina. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Today's interview is going to be part of the Australia-India Joint Impact Assessment of Critical Technologies for Peace and Stability, funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And we'll see where the interview goes because our guest has a very rich history. He's presently with Rooftop Social Consulting and also was the head of measurement, evaluation, and learning at the Paul Ramsay Foundation, and also formerly at the Australian New Zealand School of Government, where he was a senior lecturer in evidence-based decision making and the director of the Evidence and Evaluation Hub. So, George, where do we begin? Can you tell us perhaps first about your background and disciplinary focus?
Yeah, originally I trained as an economist. I did my PhD in economics and had an interest even at that time in technology and its impact on society. But along the way also picked up research and research skills and statistics, came to Australia, taught economics, political economy, and research evaluations and statistics at UNSW, and then moved on from there. Always did a lot of external advisory work, mainly with government agencies, but also with the not-for-profit sector, um, across a whole range of topics. But over the years, really specialised in evaluation and understanding the impact of different kinds of projects, including technology-based projects.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what is evaluation from that perspective?
Well, there's no no single definition, but if I can summarize it, it's using systematic processes in relation to data collection and analysis and reporting, doing that in a systematic way, a rigorous way to understand the effectiveness of something. Call it a program as a big label, but it could be, some people use the words project, initiative, whatever it is you're implementing. How do we know that that's been effective? And by effective, we mean, has it produced some definable benefit, some clear outcomes for some part of society? So yeah, it's bring the tools of rigorous and credible research and applying it to understand basically, did something work?
And as part of that, George, you're relying heavily, I imagine, on quantitative data sets. How much does qualitative data come into this area, if at all?
Well, actually, it comes in heavily, and one of the big changes in evaluation of the past, say, 10, 15 years is the development of more qualitative based approaches to understanding effectiveness and understanding what worked, and not relying solely on narrow quantitative measures. In fact, my mantra is that quantity is an aspect of quality. So even when people try to use hard numbers, for want of a better term, there are actually qualitative judgments built into that. You present a graph, a table, a correlation analysis, a regression, whatever it happens to be. There's very much qualitative judgment and qualitative assessment in that. So I'm not actually a big fan of that distinction between quantitative and qualitative. I think everything is qualitative to some degree, and just expanding on that and building on it and accepting it and drawing on insights of any form that are relevant.
Yeah, I remember teaching risk analysis to undergrads in the computing school, and presenting them with a spreadsheet and saying, well, this is traditionally how we calculate annual loss expectancy, but here's another column with respect to qualitative information that you also have to consider regarding an asset or some kind of event and its likelihood. Uh, and I remember presenting this once to Geoscience Australia, very informally. I was sitting next to somebody at a conference in Canberra post September 11, where all the risk talk and risk assessment was being done. And a lot of people were making a lot of money from these kinds of assessments. And I said, well, how do you incorporate it? Is it a distinct column in a spreadsheet, for argument's sake? Or do we look at it differently? Do we try to integrate these parameters, or it's separated and then we make a judgment based on that underlying factor that could be qualitative?
Mm.
How
Yeah,
how do you do it, George?
no, I like that, and I think my approach and the trend, I think, generally within evaluation is to talk about, well, there's different terms for it, but the term I use is performance storytelling. So if you want to understand the impact of something, you need a story to tell a story. Um, and as part of that, you blend in both quantitative and qualitative elements and evidence and data in an integrated way that gives you the whole picture, the whole understanding that you wouldn't get if it was sort of compartmentalized or decontextualized.
I can see, as you mentioned, all of this, the training courses that you also did teaching research methods, stats, and evaluation to public sector agencies, and also uh, acting as a consultant to these research projects. And I'm curious to learn, based on the relationship with the grant that the team has, whether you came across anything called technology assessment or technology impact assessment or something otherwise.
I, I have a little bit over the years because it was relevant to specific projects, and I understood. I think it really had. There was an issue at the core of it when I looked at it that was common throughout evaluation, actually. So it was a common problem appearing in a specific way, but in a very pronounced way when it came to technology. And that is often the confusion between outputs and outcomes. Perennial problem in evaluation and understanding effectiveness. People will talk about, we produced this amount of stuff, we ran these workshops, we produced this bit of technology. Strictly speaking, that's just an output. It doesn't become an outcome, it doesn't become an impact. And I'm using the word outcome and impact interchangeably here. Um, until you understand the impact it has on a particular group or define or segment of society's lives. And so it's moving beyond a quantitative count of things to which is just output focused to outcomes, meaningful impact. And like I said, when I had to look at technology impact assessment, that's what I saw was a core issue there, um, which, as I said, appears everywhere, but really pronounced in that space.
It's fascinating. A couple of days ago, we interviewed G. Pascal Zachary from the US. He said something similar. He said our processes in the US have been good, but our outcomes have been lacking.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's
Fascinating.
another way of saying the same thing. You can do lots of things. You can do them the right way. You can do them efficiently.
Hmm.
People can be happy with the output and the process leading to it. But impact is beyond that. It's looking outwardly on whose lives are you trying to make better and in what way.
Um, have you seen notions of technology impact assessment phrased in a different way?
Well, one thing and gone back and had a bit of a read of technology impact assessment just in preparation for this interview. Um, one thing I think would be useful is linking it to a lot of the discussion that has been going on over the past 10, 15 years on well-being. Um, there's a lot of work done on well-being economics and measuring well-being, and a number of jurisdictions, both here and internationally, government agencies are developing things called well-being frameworks where they sort of, and they have common dimensions within them. There's well-being in terms of health, there's well-being in terms of connection with community and society, there's well-being in terms of labour and participation in employment. Um, and I think there's scope for linking technology impact assessment to that broader discussion of well-being, which really does connect it to meaningful impact, um, helps take it beyond that simple description of process and output. I don't know if that answers your
It
question,
it
Katina, but
does. It
yeah, yeah.
does, George.
Reading it, I just think, gosh, there's really something here to take technology impact assessment a bit further and connect it with all the discussion that's going on and has been going on around well-being and understanding well-being.
It's fascinating. You're one of the first interviewees in our first 20 who has made this point. Some have asked, but why are you putting in the word impact between technology and assessment? Why are you doing this? I think you've just answered the question really well. Um,
And just to expand on that, Katina, I think the reason why there's a real parallel here, the reason why um, well-being and the concept of a well-being framework was developed was to take our understanding of progress beyond narrow economic benefit rather than just focusing on GDP,
mhm.
jobs created, understanding that there's other kinds of impacts and maybe trade-offs that you have to take. And so having a broader understanding of what human progress is has really pushed along this idea of well-being. I think that applies to technology as well. You could look at technology impact very narrowly in terms of did it raise productivity, very narrow economic approach to it. Or you could take a broader, in fact, a broader well-being approach and look at the whole range of impacts it's had on different people's lives in various ways and the distribution, the trade-offs, all of those issues. So I think there's an interesting parallel there.
Yes, we had the great fortune of interviewing Professor Evangelos Papas from RMIT University. He's a physiotherapist,
Yeah.
and we got into discussions about his area of novel inventions in that space. He's looking after he's a director of a large hub there at RMIT um, with emerging tech and integrating it with medicine and engineering. And we started talking about digital health impact assessments, which are renowned in other countries, perhaps not so much prominent in Australia, but they're
Mm.
becoming more prominent. Was at a digital health futures conference last year in May in Melbourne, and Cyro had a stall focused completely on well-being and a little
Interesting.
brochure that I've taken a
Interesting.
photo of and showed how productivity would rise if our health and well-being. In fact, they focused on well-being in this particular brochure. And they had a person feeling sluggish like this, and then right at the end, skipping for joy, and less absenteeism, less externalities as a result of uh, depression or other kinds of ailments that might hit a workforce. All these amazing things that they were showing us through simply a focus on well-being, and of course a focus on well-being in industry was one of the things that they were
Mm.
talking about in terms of health. But I do wonder, as somebody who has used macro level statistics, whether someone can embark on doing a technology impact assessment at a macro scale, like a national scale, and what tools you rely on in doing that, or what data sets you might access.
Well, I think one of the core things you'd have to do if you're going to take that macro perspective is think about distribution, because not only the things you talked about, health and well-being and all of that is an individual thing, it's also affected by distribution of resources, income, opportunity, however you conceive of it. So that understanding technology at a macro level, I think one of the key issues would be how it's affect the distribution among groups in society and people, because that also has productivity of impacts and a whole range of things. Um, so I think certainly the tools that are around for understanding distributional impact is really important when you're looking at the macro scale flow-ons of technology. I mean, obviously, the discussion around AI at the moment is an example of that. There's a big debate and research going on about how AI might impact different groups of workers and what that might mean in terms of distribution of the macro pie, if you like.
Do you advocate in a dimensionality that looks at sort of communities of interest, a micro scale, a meso scale? W- Where would be? Is it contextual? How would you broach that sort of idea?
I think it's somewhere in between. And I like to work at the group level. I don't know how that fits that taxonomy.
Meso,
Um,
yes.
but people, yeah, people tend to operate not as just as pure individuals, but also not as really large aggregates. I think they tend to operate at a group level and some sense of group identity, whether it's very local or it can be
Mhm.
there's digital communities that are not defined by geography. There's various ways of defining groups. Um, but I think it's that group level analysis is probably the most appropriate level at which to explore that.
Fantastic. Thank you for these insights. They're very helpful. Um, you mentioned AI. We talked about group level impacts by technology. Do you find that there is an established list of emerging technologies? If we talk about AI being one of these, like robotics and other types of tech, do you deal at that granular definition of what a tech is by community? How do you think we should, go about technology impact assessments in that
Oh
way?
gosh, yeah, that's a tough one. What, yeah, you're talking about what we might call the unit of analysis.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is it the the platform, if you like, the
That's right.
foundational technology, or is it the way it manifests in particular items of technology?
Mm,
Uh, look, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. When we come at it from a perspective of evaluation, it tends to be at that discrete product, the pointy end of technology, if you like, rather than the platform foundation level. It's rarely done from an evaluation perspective that you look at that sort of real base level technological change. So yeah, I'm trying to get my mind around how you might even do that, because the more you broaden out from the discrete technological product, the more overlap there is between different technologies at a fundamental level, and disentangling
mm,
those. I think you'd have to take on board a lot of the recent work on systems thinking, and understanding technology as technological systems rather than specific technologies. I think that would be, if you're going to go to that macro level, you'd have to think in terms of technological systems rather than AI or CRISPR technology or whatever it happens to be. It's the system around it and the interlocks and the overlaps. And there's been some great work in the past 10, 15 years again on systems thinking and how and the way you can evaluate complex systems, um, using what we call it developmental evaluation and other similar approaches. But that's the way I think it would, if you're going to go to that level, how you'd go about it.
yeah, we're about to complete a unit on global digital transformation, and I provided to the students the top 10 emerging technologies within Australia's critical list. And then I said, but these are all converged examples. Like AI needs to be
Yes.
unpacked, as you say, computer vision, biometrics, uh, all these levels of artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence and other categories that the government calls applications, quite interestingly. But tearing them apart, as you say, is quite difficult. And students understood because we were using a systems lens, actually,
Oh, that's
to
great.
study this. But it hit them like how complex it is. Because isn't everything just AI? No.
Yeah. And it can be, unless you, I've been in situations where people want to take a complexity approach and a systems thinking approach, but often it can be debilitating because people think, well, you can't understand something unless you understand everything.
Mm,
Um, and that kind of makes people feel like it's too big a task. But I don't think that's necessary. I think modern systems thinking does provide guidance on how you can approach complexity in a way that's still practical and doable from an understanding impact point of view.
Yes. On this, I wanted to ask you, uh, what you think the purpose of a technology impact assessment is.
Oh, that's a good question. Purpose. Well, I think it's in some ways it's similar to the purpose of understanding any other initiative that you might evaluate. You know, it's one is accountability. Resources have been used, money's been spent, people's time has been absorbed, and there's got to be some accountability that that was done effectively and had real impact. So to just simply account for the, be responsible for the fact that you've used up some kind of resources is an important reason for doing it in and of itself. Um, I think beyond that, there's also an important learning element for doing it. Um, Understanding what worked in what context for whom and how, so that we can do things better in the future is probably the other broad reason for doing it. Um, yeah,
Given your background, I know we've spoken a lot about methodology, which is one of my favorite topics. I love getting quite innovative with methodology. But what kind of criteria would you encourage people to consider when conducting a technology impact assessment,
criteria for
a TIA? So,
yeah,
w- yeah, like what elements?
yeah. I think well, to do it, there's a number of things you need to know. Argus is firstly availability of data, and again, I mean both quantitative and qualitative. You can't really evaluate or understand assess effectiveness and impact unless you're going to have the data. If it's not there, can you construct a framework and approach for getting it? Um, is that achievable? Is it how is it? What systems do you need to put in place to achieve it? So evaluation at the heart of it is good data. Again, both quantitative and qualitative be one of the core criteria. The other it's beyond that. It's sometimes it's the word appetite for it. Um, are people up for understanding and assessing the impact of technology? Because impact assessment is not a purely technical scientific process. It's a social interaction in itself. And if the context, if the environment in which you're planning to do it is a bit hostile to it, um, it sometimes you may have to do that groundbreak setting work first of getting buy-in and working with stakeholders to convince them that is necessary and will produce good results for you. Coming back to that purpose I just said. So it's understanding both the technical needs for doing an assessment or evaluation of your technological impact, but also the social context, political context in which you're doing it, and understanding the criteria are right in those terms for doing it as well.
Yeah, you read my mind. I was luring you to the human factors side and the
Yeah.
social side, being from the Social Cyber Institute. But I'm very glad you mentioned that. In fact, quite a few of the US-based TA people have said the historical elements really important, the social elements, the political environment, these kinds of quite significant things that impact and influence a TIA.
Yeah, and it comes back to systems thinking, as I said before. The answers to your assessment will mean different things for different people, both positively and negatively. And unless you understand that the that system which we're operating, you can get all sorts of things happening in the background or against you or whatever, that may limit your ability to do that impact assessment.
On this note, the effectiveness of conclusions reached in a TIA,
Mm.
how do you measure the effectiveness of what you've come up with?
Well, I'll just take one step back before that. I think
Hmm.
the thing that you can do to improve the likelihood of having some effectiveness
Hmm.
during the evaluation of the assessment is an explicit, what we call a sense making step. Um, so often in impact assessment or impact evaluation, people will gather data and they'll collect it, then go away and write a report with findings, maybe recommendations about effectiveness or otherwise of something. Uh, but that whether that itself is likely to change anything is dependent on is limited by the fact that they don't always bring in the relevant people into a sense making stage before you write the final report. So one of the things we like to do, and it's becoming more of a norm, is when you collect your data, again, both quantitative and qualitative, and before you write the report, before you develop findings, before you develop recommendations, putting the evidence on the table and having a structured discussion with the relevant groups about what it means, and then teasing out. And it may mean different things to different people. And sometimes your impact assessment will simply be to point out, yeah, we can't be conclusive. Some people view it this way, some people view it that way. But drawing out that meaning making, the sense making from the evidence in a collaborative way, I think is more likely then to allow the results of that assessment to have some impact itself downstream to be effective. So I think building that into the process. Now, what that impact might be of that assessment itself is, again, take up by others. Um, has it influenced other people's ways of working in some definable way? Did it lead people to change systems, to change approaches, to adopt new approaches or let go of old ones, for example? So that's what I would be looking for to understand the effectiveness of that impact assessment.
I imagine that requires a lot of perhaps impartiality, may not be the right word, but we had something at Arizona State Uni called decision theaters. And
Mm,
this was not a huge room, but a lot of different screens and a lot of scenario analysis. So if you
right.
pushed the button, you would see an economic impact, a social impact, a resource impact, like natural
Yeah,
resources, and
yeah.
so forth. Very interesting to be surrounded by the data in different formats. But tell me, who are the key stakeholders that you mentioned? Who are the people at the table that should be
And
invited?
great question. And it's got to start with the people who will be affected. So, yeah, we often see them as research subjects, people will go and talk to, and sometimes they're called beneficiaries, they're called all just sort of different things in evaluation speak. Um, but whoever they are, they're the starting point. Um, you don't just go and collect data from them, you actually bring them back and let them have a say in what those data mean. Um, obviously, the people who are going to use it, um, the people funding it, might be a different group, another group, people with lived experience of something uh, being at the table to talk about what it might mean for others who might have that lived experience. So again, I don't like the word impartiality or independence either. I don't think,
Anyone is.
yeah, yeah. I think the way to guard against all our partialities and lack of
Yes.
independence is to have multiple perspectives there at that sense making step. Um, it's messier and it may not lead to a convergence on a particular view, um, but I think it's going to be better for it.
It's a beautiful process or step to introduce into something like this. I really like that idea of the sense making. Uh, we agree a collaborative approach with multi-stakeholder presence and further than engagement, more consultation and more participative, almost co-leading a
Mm,
discussion, which is difficult to put in practice. But George, do you think that it's possible to conduct joint TIAs with other nations or other stakeholders in other places? Do you
Oh,
see that as a possibility?
you're probably stretching me beyond my area of expertise. I've never, my work has always tended to be focused within Australia. I've done very little international collaborative work, so you might be pushing me beyond my area of expertise here, because
That's all right. That's all right.
I wouldn't dismiss it. It'd be interesting to see how it played out. I'd be curious
mm,
to be along as part of the process, but I don't know if I could offer much on it.
yeah, where this is going is when we're looking at peace and stability through emerging tech. And our hope is that we talk to our neighbors, Australia, and others in proximate locations, how we can together, even if we do have a different top 10 emerging tech list, really consider how technology can incorporate values of peace and stability rather than conflict. And how might
Yeah,
that play out, you know?
yeah. Well, I think it. I mean, again, I'm talking more as a novice here than than an expert. But I think that idea of some universal goals, universal um, concepts like peace, stability, human rights would probably be an element, a binding element to that, or a sort of unifying element to that.
Could you tell us from your experience, whether there are any shortcomings or hindrances to technology impact assessment or any impact assessment that you've been engaged in?
The hindrances. Oh, look, I think the willingness of senior management or who of people at whatever the project structure is at the level, the higher level, to support and signal that they're willing for this impact assessment to be done incredibly rigorously and lead to wherever it's going to lead to without prejudgment, I think is critical. As I said before, it's as much a social process as it is a technocratic process. And if people perceive that senior leaders, managers, whoever they are, funders, whatever, have a particular view in how what the assessment should conclude, then there's no real point in doing it. So I think having leaders who can signal that they are willing to let this run and go in whatever direction it finds is really important. Probably the single most important barrier to remove or to avoid. Um, the other thing also is capability. Um, it's not an easy thing to do. It does require skills. A lot of people will jump in and say, yeah, I think I can do this, but they tend to fall back on old ways or rely on other people's habits that haven't been tested, don't explore different options for doing your assessment. So I think ensuring you've got the right capability for it, um, that's both individual level capability, but also resourcing and support to do it, I think is also really important.
I have a friend in the States who's an NSF evaluator, and she evaluated our large grants, $3 million grants at ASU, and she often talks about very similar things. She posts about them on LinkedIn as well. And I think um, a lot of executives are in a rush to get to
Mm,
market with various technological innovations and products and applications and software and platforms and electronic commerce capabilities. Um, and they're not too interested in evaluation, although uh, that is one of the most critical parts of
mm.
developing a new solution and seeing it diffuse into the marketplace. Do you have any advice for that? Going off what you just said, should there be more funding allocated?
I certainly think, yeah, that it, sometimes building it into the budget up front, that assessment piece, and in fact, even before that, as part of the decision making process about a project to go ahead, incorporating assessment and evaluation as part of the project rather than, oh, we're going to run the project and later on we'll think about how we're going to assess it or evaluate it. Um, to do it right from the start, and uh, managers, leaders can be really important here because they can impose it as a gateway. This project doesn't go ahead unless I know how in 2 or 3 years' time you're going to be able to tell me what impact it's had. Um, what's your process? What's your setup for that? Who are you going to include? Have you included a sense making process down the track? All of that stuff we talked about earlier. So making sure it's all thought out up front, I think is really important, and something certainly those kinds of people you just referred to can drive, because it's, I've seen it too many times where people didn't think about it, didn't plan for it. They come back and say, okay, well, now we need to understand our impact. And they realize, but we haven't collected the right data. We haven't got the right people here. We've been doing things inconsistently. We can't compare across different sites or whatever it happens to be, and it's all too late.
Yeah, in fact, we often find even the right questions haven't been asked to begin with.
And right, asking the right questions. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, yeah, it's really critical. Yeah, asking the right questions.
Like George, I've met a few evaluators over the years, and they are particular types of personalities. I'm just gonna say, in the presence of these wonderful people, I never feel rushed. I always feel listened to and heard. I've always got like a common sense response,
Oh, good.
usually, and I want to say more to support the project's development, whatever it is. I'm just going back to actual occasions when I've had the joy of being around these people. But you talked about capability. I mean, is project management one of the key
Oh,
skills an evaluator has?
yeah. Look, it's certainly a skill. I don't know where it would sit in the hierarchy of skills, but it's certainly an important one because you have to manage a lot of things when you're doing an impact assessment. um, Whether it's the social side of the project, managing your stakeholders, sensitivities, accountabilities, all of that, learning needs. There's technical project management, making sure the resources are there, the right skills are there. Um, there's an element of financial management, all of that. So project management is definitely critical because they can be very ill-defined in their boundary and evaluation,
Mm,
and it can bleed out in all sorts of ways. And yeah, you said having clear questions. It's really important to constrain it and not allow it to sort of bleed out. And at the end, people say, but I'm still not quite sure what our impact assessment is, even though we've done all these things. Um, yes, a project management definitely a skill. And I know we often we usually have someone who has that dedicated role to play in an impact assessment, because it is important to do it. Like I said, with terms of the hierarchy of skills, I don't know where it would sit, but it's certainly an important one.
okay. From your experience and learning, how often do we conduct technology impact assessments? Can you give us some insights?
Oh, I think it's being done more and more, and I know I've got colleagues here where I work now who was at CSIRO, for example,
Yeah.
CSIRO, and I've got other colleagues who are now there, and I know that key institutions in the technology system are certainly thinking more about this, which is really pleasing, because it often wasn't thought about. Technology was seen very, just got to get a product out or get something implemented, and didn't think about that broader impact. But I do think it's happening more and more, especially as issues of climate change and environmental impact are as they should be, becoming more and more common, um, um, you right at the front of our thinking. Um, that relationship between technological output and genuine impact is yeah, happening more and more. I think the environment, the climate change and impact on climate has really driven a lot of that broadening of thinking.
Yeah, we're also finding climate and health two major areas that are driving this.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
In fact, my close colleague and sort of the doyen of Evaluation Australia, Patricia Rogers, at a recent conference, she said every evaluation should have an element to it that is about impact on the environment, which is, you know, a really challenging idea. But yeah, it's certainly forcing us to think about these broader impacts.
yeah, we're seeing that in changes to national competitive grant schemes all over the world, Europe, the US, Canada, Australia, where that sustainability question is asked, or environmental question, as in addition to questions related to ethics and society that weren't there previously. We had the economics questions in terms of national impact, and now we have the social impact and other
Yeah.
areas which was not there all over the
Yeah.
world.
And that's again coming back to that thing we started with about the well-being idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, okay, so if we look at Australia, this is one of my last questions. Do we need professional industry associations of people called specialists in this field? Do we need standards? Do we need government agencies? What ideas do you have in how we can promote uh, evaluation or technology impact assessment?
I think I'm not quite sure what the appropriate institutional arrangement would be to bring it about, but I think we do have very well established professions. There's this Australian Evaluation Society. There's also the Social Impact Measurement Network of Australia, SIMNA. Um, I think it's bringing those professionals together with into the technological system that I talked about earlier, and let them make their relevant connections. Obviously, institutions like CSIRO, for example, are key players here. I think there's some specialist government agencies that do evaluations. For example, the Commonwealth Treasury has the Australian Centre for Evaluation. I think getting it on their thinking, getting it into their thinking, um, would be really valuable. So I think there's a lot of existing institutional structure that you could build on. I don't know if it needs anything substantially new, but again, I'd probably have to go away and think about it a little bit further and do my own environmental scan of what's there. But
Mm.
my hunch would be build on the institutional structure that's already there rather than create something new that people have to be dragged to.
George, as I always do, the last question is an open question. Is there anything else you wanted to add from your background, your knowledge, your insights into this discussion more broadly?
Uh, just to reiterate that starting point, that I really think there's a lot to be gained by linking technological impact assessment with the work that's going on understanding well-being. I think that would probably be a really positive step for TIA.
I couldn't agree more. I think the world is becoming more turbulent and more complex and more entangled. And I think if we are to progress in uh, ways for humanity, we're going to have to do more of these in that
Yeah,
way that you've
absolutely.
spoken about today. So, Dr. George Argyrous from Rooftop Social Consulting, what an honor it's been to listen to you respond to our question set over the last hour. Thank you so much for your
My
time.
pleasure. My pleasure. It was a pleasure to have this conversation.